A warship, a top-secret experiment, and an event impossible to explain. In 1943, something happened in the waters of Philadelphia, something that defies logic, science, and even time itself. Reports speak of disappearance, of an unexplainable teleportation, of terrifying consequences. Was it a revolutionary breakthrough or a catastrophic failure, a tightly kept secret, or just an elaborate myth? The Philadelphia experiment challenges everything we think we know about reality. And now, it's time to uncover what really happened. Brace yourself, the truth might be scarier than you ever imagined. A world where secret experiments defied the laws of physics, and maybe even the very fabric of time. It was 1943. The world was at war, and the United States was desperate for any advantage against its enemies. Radar had become a crucial tool for tracking ships and submarines in the ocean. But American scientists were about to test a new technology, one that could make warships invisible. At the heart of this top-secret operation was the USS Eldridge, a newly built destroyer that officially never saw combat. But its true purpose was anything but ordinary. Reports suggest it became the site of an experiment that would challenge every known law of space and time. In the naval yards of Philadelphia, engineers and scientists, possibly with the involvement of Albert Einstein himself, were conducting research on high-intensity electromagnetic fields. The goal was simple: make the ship disappear from enemy radar. But what happened that October night was something far beyond known science. And then, on what seemed like an ordinary day, the experiment was activated. The USS Eldridge was suddenly engulfed in a glowing green mist. The ship's structure trembled violently, as if on the verge of being torn apart. Witnesses on the dock watched in horror as, in the blink of an eye, the destroyer simply vanished. But that wasn't the end of the story. Far from it. It was only the beginning of one of the greatest mysteries in military history. The clock read approximately 5 p.m. on October 28, 1943. The USS Eldridge sat quietly in the Philadelphia harbor, its engines silent, while a select group of scientists and military officers closely monitored the test. High-voltage cables connected to the ship began pulsing with intense electrical currents. The technology at play: experimental electromagnetic fields, theoretically based on Albert Einstein's famous unified field theory. At first, everything seemed normal, but then something strange started to happen. The Eldridge became surrounded by a pulsating green fog, as if being pulled into an unseen force. The air around the ship shimmered, bending light in unnatural ways, as if reality itself was being distorted. And then, an ear-splitting sound, a thunderous noise that didn't seem natural, shook the entire area. And in the next moment, the ship was gone. Not just from radar, it disappeared from existence. The scientists and military officials were in shock. Something had gone terribly wrong. The experiment was only supposed to make the ship invisible to enemy radar, but the Eldridge was simply gone. No wreckage, no smoke, nothing. Just an eerie emptiness where it had been. What no one could have imagined was that, at that exact moment, hundreds of miles away in Norfolk, Virginia, a massive warship suddenly appeared out of nowhere. Fishermen, civilians, and military personnel in the area watched in disbelief as a ship literally materialized before their eyes, as if it had passed through an invisible portal. For a few minutes, it remained there, surrounded by the same eerie green mist. And then, it vanished again. Moments later, the USS Eldridge reappeared in Philadelphia, right where it had disappeared from. But something was very, very wrong. Cautiously, the officers and scientists approached, expecting to find the crew celebrating the success of the experiment. Instead, what they found on board was absolute horror. When the team of scientists and naval officers stepped onto the USS Eldridge, they witnessed something that defied all logic. The sailors were screaming in sheer panic, as if they had seen something beyond human comprehension. Some were disoriented, with no memory of what had happened in the past few minutes. Others, however, were fused into the metal of the ship. Yes, fused. Their bodies were partially merged with the Eldridge's structure, as if flesh and steel had melted together in a grotesque process. Some were still alive, moaning in agony, with parts of their bodies sticking out of the deck and walls of the ship. Others, completely motionless, stood frozen in time, human statues of horror, eternally trapped within the metal. Those who didn't suffer this nightmarish fate weren't spared either. Many were found in a deep, trance-like state, completely frozen, as if time itself had stopped for them. Others had mental breakdowns, screaming incoherent phrases and claiming they had seen things that did not belong to this world. A group of survivors was removed from the ship and taken to secret military facilities. Few were ever seen again. Some reports say they mysteriously vanished, as if the experiment had severed their connection to reality. Others claim they became victims of brutal psychological experiments in an attempt to understand what had happened to their minds. There are even stories of sailors randomly turning invisible, appearing and disappearing uncontrollably, until one day they were just gone forever. But there was something even more disturbing: time. Clocks inside the ship showed a different time than those outside, as if the USS Eldridge and its crew had been thrown into a time warp. What started as a simple invisibility experiment had now become one of the creepiest and most unexplainable events in modern history. Faced with this absolute horror, the top brass of the Navy had to make a decision. The project had to be shut down. The Philadelphia experiment could never become public. But was that really the last time experiments like this took place? Or did this technology continue to evolve in the shadows? As details of the Philadelphia experiment began leaking to the public decades later, a bizarre and unsettling theory emerged. Albert Einstein might have been involved. Many believe that the tests on the USS Eldridge were based on the unified field theory, a concept Einstein had been working on since the 1920s. According to this theory, fundamental forces like gravity and electromagnetism could be merged into a single field, unlocking technologies that defy logic. Even though Einstein never confirmed any involvement, there's evidence suggesting that US government scientists were experimenting with high-intensity electromagnetic fields, using his equations as a foundation. But if this technology really existed, was the Philadelphia experiment ever truly shut down? Or did it simply evolve into something even darker? Decades after the USS Eldridge supposedly vanished, rumors started circulating about a new secret experiment, this time in Montauk, New York, during the 1980s. The so-called Montauk Project was allegedly a direct continuation of the teleportation and time manipulation experiments started in 1943. But this time, the goal wasn't to make a ship invisible. It was something much worse. Former military personnel and whistleblowers claimed that Montauk became a hub for experiments involving time travel. Some witnesses claimed that scientists managed to open windows into different eras of history. Mind control. Electromagnetic waves were supposedly used to manipulate human thoughts and behavior. Contact with other dimensions. There are reports that the experiments created rifts into parallel realities, and that something might have crossed over into our world. One of the most famous whistleblowers, Al Bielek, claimed he wasn't just a victim of these experiments. He traveled through time himself and had his memories erased by the government. Could it be that the Philadelphia experiment wasn't a mistake, but rather the first step towards something much bigger? And more importantly, are these experiments still happening today? The truth remains hidden, buried beneath layers of government secrecy and conspiracy theories. But one thing is certain: where there's smoke, there's fire. Ever since the first rumors about the Philadelphia experiment started to surface, the U.S. Government has categorically denied that any such experiment ever took place. In response to the allegations, the US Navy officially stated that the USS Eldridge was never involved in tests related to invisibility, teleportation, or any other secret experiment. According to official records, the ship was simply carrying out standard missions during World War II. But if nothing happened, why were witnesses and whistleblowers silenced? Several former military personnel have claimed to know the truth about what really happened that night in 1943. Many of them, however, met mysterious fates. Carlos Miguel Allende, one of the key whistleblowers, wrote letters detailing everything he knew about the experiment. Shortly after, he vanished without a trace. Others reported constant threats and surveillance from government agents. Some crew members who survived the experiment were allegedly sent to military facilities, never to be seen again. If the Philadelphia experiment was nothing but a hoax, why did so many people involved either die, disappear, or have their lives completely destroyed? In 1955, when the USS Eldridge was handed over to Greece, all records of its operations mysteriously disappeared. There seems to be no detailed documentation of the ship's activities before that point. On top of that, classified government files about experiments involving magnetic fields and radar invisibility remain top secret to this day. Whenever researchers try to obtain information through official requests, the response is always the same. No relevant documents were found. But the biggest red flag: multiple witnesses claim that the experiment never truly ended. It simply continued in highly classified military bases, such as the infamous Area 51 and the underground Montauk facility. If the government wants us to believe that this is just another conspiracy theory, then why the absolute secrecy? Maybe the truth is too dangerous to reveal, or maybe we're just not ready for it. Decades have passed since that supposed night in October 1943, but the story of the USS Eldridge and its impossible journey still fascinates researchers, scientists, and conspiracy theorists alike. But the big question remains: did it really happen? For many historians and scientists, the Philadelphia experiment is nothing more than a misunderstanding or an elaborate hoax. Some believe that sailors simply confused routine degaussing procedures with an invisibility experiment. During World War II, it was common for ships to undergo magnetic field treatments to avoid triggering enemy mines. Others argue that Carlos Miguel Allende, the man who first spread the story, might have made the whole thing up or exaggerated a real event. The teleportation to Norfolk? Some skeptics claim it was just a misinterpretation. The USS Eldridge was in the Norfolk area at some point, but traveled there the conventional way: no teleportation, no time anomalies. Could the Philadelphia experiment really be just a myth that grew over time? Or are these rational explanations nothing more than a smokescreen to hide the truth? Despite all efforts to debunk the story, there are still details that just don't add up. Why did multiple witnesses report the same phenomenon independently? Was the disappearance of official records about the USS Eldridge just a coincidence? If the experiment never happened, why did the government enforce absolute secrecy over any tests related to invisibility and electromagnetic fields? Whatever the truth may be, it seems buried under layers of disinformation, classified files, and silenced witnesses. One thing is certain: science is evolving at a rapid pace. What was impossible in 1943 could very well be happening right now, without the world ever knowing. If the US really had access to technology capable of manipulating space and time, do you think they would share it with the world? Or are these experiments still happening in the shadows, inside top-secret facilities, pushing the limits of what's possible? Maybe one day the truth will come to light, or maybe it's already too late. The Philadelphia experiment remains one of the biggest unsolved mysteries of modern times. Whether it was a catastrophic failure of science, a massive misunderstanding, or a dark truth hidden from humanity, we may never know for sure. But one thing cannot be denied. The truth is out there, and it might be far scarier than we ever imagined.